Hi everyone, I'm Choreo, a solutions architect at WSO2. In this video, we are considering the implementation of a product replenishment scenario. So we have multiple shopping outlets and also multiple warehouses. If we consider the current IT systems used by this retail chain, we have an inventory system, product catalog, and a shipment system. Inventory system maintains product levels or stock levels of all warehouses. Then the product catalog maintains details about each and every product, including, for example, product ID, product name, price, etc. Then the shipment system manages shipments between warehouses and shopping outlets. So a scenario is that if a particular shopping outlet runs out of a product, then we should have an API from which this shopping outlets systems can query about the stock for this product. So the API call would look like something similar to this. It should contain the product ID, store location, and the required quantity. Then this API should connect with all these systems as necessary and give back this response. The response should contain the current price of the product and list of warehouses from which we can get the product. Then for each warehouse, we need the stock level and the shipping cost as well as the shipping delay. So this is our scenario. Now we can look at the current systems and how we can use those for building this API. So these current systems are the inventory system, product catalog, and the shipment system. Now the product catalog is something like this, where we have the base URL and the URL path is products/product ID. For this, we have to give an API key as the authentication mechanism. Once we invoke this, it will give us all the details about this particular product. Then in the inventory system, again, we have the base URL and the path is inventory. Then we have to give the product ID as a URL path. For that also, we have to give the API key as well. So when we invoke that, we get the product ID as well as the list of warehouses which contain this product. So for each warehouse, we get the location and the current stock level. Then the shipments service or the API has this URL, shipments/code. Then again, it is protected by API key. So when we invoke, we have to give a Json payload, which contains the start location, which is the warehouse, and the destination location, which is the shopping store location. Once we invoke this, it will give us the shipping cost and the shipping duration. So these are our existing services. Now let's build this business application using the Choreo platform. So this is the home page of the Choreo platform. So I will go to components and I want to create a new REST API. So let's name this as the Alpha Stores API. So we can create the API. Now the API is created. You can see that it has created a sample service as well as a sample method. But we want to replace this logic, sample logic, with the business logic that we need. For that, let's go to the edit view so that we can edit the business logic of this service. Now we are in the edit view. Now let's remove this sample implementation. Now let's name this service and the sample method with the names that we need. So let's just name the service as product stock. And we are fine with the product, the port, so we can keep it. Now we are done renaming the service. Now let's rename the method as well. So we want this to be a post request because we have to give a payload. Then let's name this as replenishment info. Okay. Now the response type or the return type for this should be JSON, because we need to send all this information that we have shown here. Then we want to configure the parameters as well. So we don't need any path parameters, so we don't have to add anything. So we don't need any query parameters as well, so we can remove that. Now we need a payload for this. Payload type is JSON, so we can keep the name as it is. So now we are done with configuring the service method. Now we can go to the actual implementation. First, let's invoke the product API, which is the product catalog API. The API is this one. So let's copy the product API URL, and we can invoke this service by using HTTP connector. So let's define the connector first. We can name that as product endpoint. URL is the one that we just copied. Okay. Now we are done with configuring the connector. Now we can invoke any methods of this connector. We want to invoke the get method to get the product info. You can select the method here. Then you have to give the path. So path here will be payload dot product ID. So what we are saying is that we are expecting a JSON payload named payload, and within that JSON, there should be a field called product ID. Because this can possibly throw an error, we have to add the check construct at the beginning. Now this will invoke the service. Now we have to give a name for the response variable as well. So let's call that product data. Response type is JSON, so we are fine with that. Okay, now we can check the implementation up to this point. But before that, we have to give the API key as well, because this is a protected service method. So let's copy the API key from the REST client. Then we can add the header here. And the header value is the API key value. Okay, now we are done with adding the API key as well, so that we can invoke the protected service. Now we can save. And we can just return the product data from this and check this out. So the return expression is product data. Okay, now we are done with building the first part of this service. Now we can run that, and then we can try that out. Okay, it shows all the available methods. In this case, we have only one method. So let's invoke that. So our payload here should contain these details. But at this point, we are only using the product ID. So we can just give that if needed. So let's call the product ID is 10. Okay, now we are done. We can invoke. Okay, now you can see that this implementation invokes the backend service with the API key and then gives back the response to us. Now, first part is done. Now we can move on to the second part, which is to get the inventory data. But before that, we know that we need a complex JSON as the response. Therefore, we can define this JSON as a data type or a record in Choreo. Let's do that first. So this data type is a record. So here there are two parts. One is that we have to give details about warehouses and then the whole response. Let's add a data type for this new variable or the JSON. So data types are records in Choreo. We can give any name. So let's name it as warehouse info. So the fields we need is the stock level. First we need the location as well, which is a string. Then we need the stock level. Then we need the shipping cost. And finally, the shipping duration. Okay, now we are done with defining part of the structure. Now we have to define the enclosing structure, data structure. Again, we define a new record. We can call that as stock info. So here we need the price, current price, and an array of warehouse info, because for each warehouse we need to add a warehouse info field. We can initialize this to an empty array. Okay, we are done with that. Now we can go ahead and build the rest of the service. Okay, let's first invoke the inventory service. Let's copy the inventory service URL. Then we have to define a new connector because the URL is different. We can name that as inventory endpoint. The URL is the one that we just copied. Now we are done with configuring the connection for the inventory. Now we can invoke the get method on that. Path again is the product ID field of the input JSON. We have to give the API key as well. We can add that. For the response variable, just name that as inventory data. Type is JSON, so we are fine with that. Okay, now we are done with that. Now, what it will return is a payload like this, which contains an array of warehouse information. Now, for each of these warehouse, we need to check, or we need to invoke the shipment service and get the shipping cost and the duration from that warehouse to our shopping outlet. So let's implement that part now. We can use the for each constructor to iterate through the array. Before that, we have to get the warehouses component of this JSON response. Let's name that as warehouses. So our value is from inventory data, we need the field warehouses. Okay, now we are done. Now this can be any JSON. Now we want to continue with the rest of it only if this is a JSON array. So we can do this check here. If warehouses is JSON array, we can continue with the rest of the business logic. Then for each element of this JSON array, we have to perform the task that we mentioned earlier. So let's iterate through this JSON array. We can name each part of this response as warehouse. The array we want to iterate is the warehouses array. Now we got the warehouse information part, which is this one. Now we have to get the location and then invoke the shipment service with the warehouse location, which is the start location, and the destination location, which is the shopping outlet location. Now let's do that part. As we are invoking the shipment service, we have to first define the shipping connector. So similar to these ones, let's define a new connector, but we are going to define that before the iteration or the loop, so that we are not defining that again and again. We can name that as shipment endpoint. And the URL, we can copy that from the REST client. We can save the connection. Now, before invoking this service or the post method from this endpoint, we have to define the JSON payload. Let's do that first. Let's create a new JSON variable. Let's name that as shipping request. So variable content is start location. So start location here is the warehouse location. We can extract that from the warehouse JSON variable. Then also we have to give the destination, which is the store location, which is available in the input payload. Now we are done defining this input variable. Okay, show some error. Okay, so this has to be a warehouse. Okay, now we are done. Okay, now we can invoke this shipping endpoint with this payload. Let's use an action for that. Our endpoint is shipping endpoint. The operation is post in this case, and we don't have to give any path. Let's keep that as blank. And our message is shipping request. Okay, so we can name the response as shipment data. Response type is again JSON. Now for this also we have to give the API key. Okay, now we are done with configuring the service invocation for the shipment service. Now what we need to do is that we have completed invoking all the services and we have got the outputs. Now we want to fill our response variable with this data. So first let's define the response variable. We can start defining that just after getting the product data, because to start that we only need the product price. So let's create a variable of type stock info. Just name that as stock info itself. Okay. So we can initialize that with the price, because that is the information that we have now at this moment. Price, we have to extract that from the product data. You can see here that in product data response, we have a price field. So we are just assigning that here. Okay. Now we can go to the loop and fill out section for each warehouse. So let's define a variable of type warehouse info. Okay. Our payload is, we need first the stock level, which we can extract from the warehouse response. This contains the stock level, so we are extracting that here. Now, then we need the, so it shows all the required parameters. We need the store location. Again, we can extract that from warehouse. Location. Then we need shipping cost that we can extract from the shipment data. Last one is shipping duration, which we can extract from, again, shipment data. I think the field name is duration. So here for each field access, we are using the check construct because it can possibly throw an error as well. Now we are done filling the response for each warehouse. Now once we are done filling that, we have to add that to the warehouse array of the response. So let's use push method from the array for that. So we want to use stock info warehouses. Then we can use push method. Okay, now we are done with adding this warehouse info part to this array. Okay, that's it. Now we are done implementing the business service. Now we just have to return the final value here, which is stock info. So this is a data or record type. So we have to convert that to JSON. Okay, so that is our return expression. Now we are done with that. Now we can just run this and check this out. Okay. Now we can try out this. It shows the available methods. So we have only one method. For this, we have to give the required payload, which should contain the product ID and the store location. Also, we are giving the quantity as well, but we are not using that internally. Let's say we need 100 units. Okay, now we can invoke this and try out. Okay, now you can see that here, this business service invokes all three backend services and constructs the required payload or response payload and returns that. So here it contains the price and the list of warehouses from which we can order this product. And for each warehouse, it contains the warehouse location, current stock, and the shipment cost and the shipping duration. So that is it. We have completed implementing the service. Then we can deploy this into the development environment and do our testing, and then also deploy this into production environment as any other Choreo service. And also we can manage API details like security and rate limiting as well.